at 2:13 in the morning. While I was sleeping in a vinyl chair beside my mother's hospital bed, my phone vibrated against my palm. The screen displayed a simple security alert from the house I had inherited from my grandmother 12 years earlier. Interior motion detected. I assumed my husband had come home late from another client dinner. Grant had been sending me concerned messages all evening, asking whether my mother's pain medication was helping, whether I had eaten, whether I planned to stay at the hospital through the night. He had written, "Take care of your mother. I will take care of everything at home." For 12 years. That sentence would have comforted me. That night, it made me open the camera application. The first live feed showed our front hallway. A woman I had never invited into my home was standing beneath my grandmother's crystal light fixture, wearing my cream cashmere sweater. She held one of my wine glasses in her left hand and dragged a rose gold suitcase with her right. Behind her came my husband, carrying 2 more bags and smiling like a man returning from a honeymoon. The woman was Madison Vale, a 31-year-old client relations manager at Grant's firm. I knew her face from company holiday parties. I had once complimented her earrings. I had once trusted her to arrange a surprise birthday dinner for my husband. Now she placed her suitcase against my staircase and turned slowly in a circle, taking in the original woodwork, the stained glass windows, and the oil portrait of my grandmother above the fireplace. "It is even better than the pictures," she whispered. Grant set down the bags and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I told you," he said. "Once Evelyn is out of the way, this will all be ours." I stopped breathing. Madison glanced toward the dark hallway. "What if she comes home early?" Grant laughed softly. "She will not. Her mother needs her for at least another week. And when Evelyn does come back, she will not be staying here for long." Then they began removing my life from the walls. Madison lifted our wedding photograph from the mantel and examined it with a mocking smile. "You looked miserable even then," she said. Grant took the frame from her, opened a cardboard box, and dropped it inside. "Pack it with the rest of her things." I did not call him. I did not wake my mother. I did not drive 3 hours through the night and confront them in my living room. I pressed the download icon, preserved the original recording, and watched. By sunrise, Madison had carried clothes from my closet into the guest room, tried on 3 of my dresses, and told a friend on a video call that the house would soon belong to her. At 8:14 that morning, the kitchen camera captured the conversation that changed the situation from adultery to something far more dangerous. Madison stood at my marble island stirring coffee while Grant opened the cabinet where I kept my prescription bottles. "Are you sure the medicine will be enough?" she asked. Grant did not look surprised by the question. He lifted one of the bottles, turned it between his fingers, and replied, "It worked last month." She thought the dizziness was stress. "When she comes home, I will make sure she has another episode in front of witnesses. After that, the emergency paperwork takes care of everything." Madison looked uneasy. "And the doctor will agree. The doctor has months of my calls documenting confusion, memory problems, and irrational behavior. Her sister believes me. My mother believes me. Once Evelyn loses control in front of everyone, no judge will leave her in charge of the house or the trust." Madison lowered her voice. "What exactly did you put in it?" Grant glanced toward the hallway and smiled. "Enough to make her look unstable. Not enough to make anyone ask the right questions." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. My husband thought I was sitting beside my sick mother. Unaware that another woman had moved into my home, he did not know every word he spoke was being copied to 3 separate servers. He did not know the woman he planned to erase had spent 15 years investigating staged accidents, fraudulent medical claims, and spouses who tried to turn private cruelty into paperwork. "My name is Evelyn Mercer. I am 40 years old, and I work as a senior insurance fraud investigator. Before I tell you how my husband tried to replace me, drug me, and steal the house my grandmother left me. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe silence can be strategy. Because Grant thought my absence meant helplessness, he was about to learn that a house can remember everything. To understand why Madison was wearing my clothes while my husband discussed my medicine, we have to go back 6 months. To the first morning, I woke up on the kitchen floor with Grant kneeling beside me and pretending to be terrified. The day had begun normally. I had been preparing for a meeting with a regional insurance carrier about a series of suspicious disability claims. Grant stood at the counter in his tailored navy suit, making tea. He always insisted on preparing my morning drink when he was home. He called it one of the small rituals that kept our marriage strong. I remember lifting the cup, tasting something unusually bitter, and asking whether he had changed the brand. Grant laughed and said, "My senses were becoming dramatic with age." 20 minutes later, I felt the room tilt. My knees weakened. My vision blurred. And the porcelain cup slipped from my fingers. The next thing I remembered was Grant's hand against my cheek and his voice telling me not to move. He had already called my sister, my doctor, and an ambulance. He told everyone I had been confused all week. That was not true. But at the time, I was grateful he seemed so prepared. At the hospital, the tests showed nothing immediately catastrophic. The emergency physician suggested exhaustion, dehydration, or an interaction with medication. Grant sat beside my bed, holding my hand. He answered questions before I could. He described me forgetting appointments I had never forgotten, leaving the stove on when I had not cooked, and getting lost while driving a route I had taken for years. I corrected him twice. He squeezed my hand and said gently, "Evain, you may not remember." The nurse looked at me with sympathy. That look bothered me more than the dizziness. I was used to interviewing people who had been told their own memories were unreliable. I knew how quickly concern could become control. Yet Grant had been my husband for 12 years. He had supported me through my grandmother's death, through my mother's first surgery, through the long renovation of Hawthorne House. I told myself his exaggeration came from fear. I did not know he was beginning a record. Hawthorne House had belonged to the women in my family for nearly a century. My great-grandmother bought the property when women in her community were rarely allowed to control significant assets. My grandmother preserved it through 2 recessions and refused every developer who wanted to tear it down. When she died, she placed the house in the Mercer Family Preservation Trust and named me the primary beneficiary and sole managing trustee. The arrangement was simple. I could live there, restore it, and pass it to another generation. But no spouse could claim ownership merely by marriage. Grant knew the house had come from my family. He did not know the full structure of the trust because he had never cared enough to read it. He called legal documents boring. He preferred to tell guests that we bought a historic home and let them assume his salary had paid for it. I rarely corrected him. That was one of many mistakes I made in the name of peace. Grant worked as Director of Private Client Relations at Ellison Wealth Management. He was charming, polished, and exceptionally skilled at making people feel important. At dinners, he spoke about protecting generational wealth. At home, he rolled his eyes when I discussed fraud prevention. "You spend your life looking for the worst in people," he often said. "Not everyone is a criminal." I would answer that most fraud did not begin with a dramatic crime. It began with access, entitlement, and a person convinced no one was paying attention. Grant always laughed. By then, he had already started seeing Madison. I learned later, their affair began during a client conference 18 months before I saw her in my house. Madison admired everything Grant wanted, admired his suits, his connections, his expensive watch, his stories about advising powerful families. She did not know the watch had been my anniversary gift. She did not know I had covered the mortgage on the condo he owned before our marriage when his commissions collapsed. She did not know the luxury car he drove was leased through a company account I had personally guaranteed. Grant showed her the surface of our life and claimed he had built it alone. For a while, the symptoms came and went. I would wake with a heavy head after taking my evening medication. I would lose parts of conversations. Once, during dinner with Grant's mother, Beatrice, I stood too quickly and nearly fell. Grant caught me before I hit the floor. Beatrice gasped. Grant guided me to a chair and told her, "This is what I have been worried about." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He looked down, performing reluctant concern. "The confusion. The dizziness. You forgetting things." Beatrice reached across the table and touched my wrist. "Evain. Perhaps you should take a leave from work." I laughed because the suggestion seemed absurd. I had just completed one of the most demanding investigations of my career. I managed teams across 3 states. I reviewed thousands of pages of evidence without missing a deadline. But when I defended myself, Grant became quieter, sadder, more convincing. "No one is attacking you," he said. "We are trying to help." That became his favorite sentence. "We are trying to help." He used it when he asked for access to my medical portal. He used it when he suggested placing his name on my financial accounts in case something happened. He used it when he proposed becoming co-trustee of Hawthorne House. I refused the trust request immediately. Grant smiled, kissed my forehead, and said he understood. 3 days later, he called my sister, Caroline, and told her I was becoming paranoid about money. I did not know about that call until much later. Caroline and I had never been especially close. She lived in another state, raised 2 children, and visited only a few times each year. Grant was careful to contact her when I was unavailable. He described incidents in a calm, sorrowful voice. He told her I had accused him of stealing. He said I hid documents and forgot where I placed them. He said I was resisting medical care. None of it was true. But each claim was close enough to reality to sound plausible. I did keep documents secured. I did ask questions about accounts. I did reject unnecessary medical access. Grant converted ordinary caution into symptoms. The second major episode happened at my company's annual compliance dinner. I had taken my normal medication before leaving home. Grant poured me sparkling water in the kitchen. At the event, while speaking with a senior executive, I suddenly lost the thread of my sentence. The room blurred. I gripped the edge of a table and heard Grant say loudly, "Evain? We talked about this. You should not be working when you are like this." Several colleagues turned Elme. He guided me into a chair as if he had predicted the moment. Someone filmed part of it on a phone. The recording later appeared in an email attachment sent to a private guardianship attorney. At the time, I believed Grant had saved me from public embarrassment. I apologized to him in the car. He stared out the window and said, "I do not know how much longer I can protect you if you refuse to admit something is wrong." Those words stayed with me, not because I believed them, but because they sounded rehearsed. Protect you. Admit something is wrong. They were not the words of a frightened husband. They were the language of a future affidavit. I began documenting my own health. I purchased a blood pressure monitor, kept a symptom journal, and requested complete copies of my medical records. Grant noticed. He called it obsessive. I told him my work had taught me to trust records over impressions. He became unusually affectionate for the next 2 weeks. Flowers arrived at my office. He cooked dinner every night. He insisted on organizing my medication into a weekly container. I let him, because I still had not accepted what my instincts were suggesting. Love does not disappear the moment suspicion appears. Sometimes it stays long enough to make you doubt the evidence in front of you. Then my mother became ill. She needed surgery followed by rehabilitation. and the hospital was 3 hours away. Grant encouraged me to stay with her. He said he would manage the house, collect the mail, and keep everything ready for my return. You need to focus on family, he told me, as though he were not family too. The night before I left, he packed my bag. He placed my medication in a side compartment and reminded me to take it. I remember thinking his concern felt almost tender. I kissed him goodbye the next morning. He held me longer than usual. Do not rush home, he said. I have everything under control. He was telling the truth. He had simply mistaken control for ownership. For the first 4 days at the hospital, my attention remained on my mother. Her surgery had gone well, but recovery was painful. I slept in short stretches, spoke with nurses, tracked medications, and helped her take slow walks down the corridor. Grant called each evening at exactly 9. He always asked whether I had taken my own medicine. The question seemed caring until the 5th night, when he became irritated after I said I had skipped a dose because I felt unusually tired. You cannot do that, he snapped. Then his voice softened. I mean, you need consistency. The doctor said consistency matters. My doctor had never told him that. I asked which doctor he meant. Grant paused for less than a second, then said, the emergency physician. Months ago, I knew the physician had recommended follow-up, not a specific routine. I wrote the exchange in my notebook. The next morning, while my mother slept, I checked the pills Grant had packed. The labels looked normal. The tablets looked familiar. I did not take them. Instead, I placed the container in a plastic evidence bag I carried for work and called Dr. Dade Lanaortiz, an independent physician who had consulted on several of my fraud cases. I explained only that I suspected my medication might have been altered and asked how to preserve it for testing. Her tone changed immediately. Do not consume anything from that container, she said. Bring it to me or send it through a documented chain. And Evelyn, if you believe someone intentionally interfered with medication, you need legal advice and law enforcement. At that moment, I still wanted another explanation. A pharmacist error, a manufacturing defect. Anything that did not require believing my husband had deliberately made me ill. Then the security alert arrived at 213 a.m. and the camera showed Madison carrying her suitcases into my home. After the kitchen conversation, denial was no longer an option. I watched every available feed from the previous 48 hours. The camera system was more sophisticated than Grant knew. 2 years earlier, after a burglary attempt, I had hired a forensic security company to install visible cameras and a second layer of concealed sensors. The visible devices could be disabled through the household panel. The concealed cameras stored encrypted copies off-site. Grant had complained about false notifications and assumed I eventually shut the whole system down. I allowed him to believe that because I had learned from work that security is strongest when it does not advertise itself. The hidden feeds showed him disabling the visible system at 6:42 p.m. The event log preserved his access code, the device he used, and the exact time. At 7:20. Madison arrived in a rideshare with 3 suitcases. At 7:22. Grant opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for my mother's 70th birthday. At 7:41. They kissed beneath my grandmother's portrait. At 8:00. Madison entered my closet. At 9:30. They carried boxes from the attic and labeled them Evelyn Storage. At 10:15. Grant entered my office with a key I had never given him. He searched my desk, photographed trust documents, and removed a sealed envelope from the bottom drawer. At 10:22, he called someone and said, I found the original schedule. The occupancy clause is exactly where you said. A male voice answered through the speaker. Then you need the incapacity order before you attempt any transfer. Without it, the spouse has no standing. Grant replied. That will be handled next week. The hidden camera captured every word. I downloaded the clip and checked the number against a reverse directory. It belonged to Philip Dane, an attorney known for aggressive guardianship cases. I had encountered his name in an elder exploitation investigation 3 years earlier. He had not been charged, but his methods had troubled several judges. I called my attorney, Naomi Price. Before dawn, Naomi had represented the Mercer Trust since my grandmother's death. She listened without interrupting while I described the recordings. When I finished, she said, First, do not return home. Second, send me copies through the secure portal. Third, I am freezing all discretionary changes to the trust this morning. Fourth, we are contacting the police and a medical crimes investigator. This is no longer a marital dispute. Hearing someone else say it made the room colder. Can the house be taken? I asked. Not legally, Naomi said, but Grant may be trying to manufacture authority. If he gets a temporary incapacity order and persuades a court that immediate action is necessary, he could create chaos before we reverse it. The trust protects the property, but protection still requires enforcement. I looked through the glass at my mother, sleeping under a thin hospital blanket. He has been building a case for months. Then we will build the truth faster. Naomi instructed me not to confront Grant, not to post anything online, and not to warn Madison. She arranged for Dr. Dacian Ortiz to receive the medication through a courier who documented each handoff. She contacted Detective Samuel Reed, a financial crimes investigator with experience in coercive control and medical fraud. By noon, 3 professionals knew what I knew. Grant believed no one knew. That imbalance became my greatest advantage. I answered his next call with the same tired warmth I had used all week. He asked how my mother was doing. I said she might need several more days of observation. I apologized for leaving him alone. Grant told me not to worry. In the background, I heard a woman laugh and a cabinet door close. Are you at home? I asked. Of course, he said. I am making soup. The camera showed Madison sitting on my kitchen counter wearing my silk robe while Grant poured champagne. You sound distracted, I said. Just tired. He replied. You should take your medicine and rest. I told him I would. Then I watched him smile at the phone after we disconnected. Madison slid her arms around his neck. She has no idea, she said. Grant kissed her. Evelyn never sees what is directly in front of her. I saved that clip too. Over the next 3 days, I became 2 women. 2 Grant. I was the exhausted daughter, sleeping beside her mother, increasingly forgetful and grateful for his help. To Naomi and Detective Reed, I was an investigator assembling a timeline. I reviewed every symptom episode from the previous 6 months. I compared dates against Grant's presence, pharmacy refills, meals he prepared, and calls he made to doctors. Patterns emerged with frightening clarity. The dizziness occurred only when Grant handled my medication or drinks. The public incidents happened near witnesses he had already contacted. His calls to my sister often occurred within hours. The videos he sent to Philip Dane were edited to begin after I became disoriented, never showing what I had consumed beforehand. He was not reacting to a decline. He was producing one. Dr. Ortiz called on the 3rd afternoon. She spoke carefully because the final laboratory report was still pending. The container you sent does not match the dispensing record, she said. Some tablets appear to have been substituted or contaminated. I will not speculate beyond the analysis. But you were right not to take them. My legs weakened. I sat in the hospital stairwell where no one could hear me. Could that explain the episodes? It could explain several symptoms you described. We also reviewed your prior emergency results. Nothing in your history supports the progressive condition, Grant reported. Can you put that in writing? I already am. After the call, I cried for exactly 4 minutes. I did not cry because Grant had a mistress. Adultery was almost simple compared with what he had done. I cried because I remembered him kneeling beside me on the kitchen floor, stroking my hair, telling the paramedics he was terrified of losing me. He had created the crisis and then performed devotion for an audience. Every tender act had become evidence of preparation. When I returned to my mother's room, she was awake. She studied my face and asked what was wrong. I had not planned to tell her yet. But my mother had spent 70 years recognizing lies. Grant is trying to take the house, I said. Her expression did not change. How? By making people believe I cannot care for myself. She reached for my hand. Is that why you have been getting sick? I nodded. My mother closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the weakness from surgery had been replaced by something hard. Your grandmother warned me about men who love a house more than the woman who owns it. I almost laughed. I thought Grant loved me. Perhaps he loved the version of you who made his life easier. That is not the same thing. I told her about Madison. My mother listened. Then said, Do not come home for my sake. Stay until you are ready. You need me here. I need you alive and in control of your own name. She insisted I use her private recovery suite after discharge, so Grant would believe my return remained uncertain. She also gave Naomi permission to review old trust correspondence. My grandmother had included a clause I had forgotten: any spouse who attempted to obtain control through fraud, coercion, or manufactured incapacity would immediately lose all occupancy privileges and any discretionary benefit. The house was not merely protected from divorce. It was protected from exactly the kind of man Grant had become. The question was whether we could prove the trigger before he acted. The cameras continued giving us answers. Madison hosted 2 friends at Hawthorne House on Friday night. She wore my black evening dress, opened another bottle from the cellar, and gave them a tour as though she were selling the property. This will be the formal dining room, she said. Grant wants to modernize the kitchen. But I told him the old money look is part of the value. One friend asked where Grant's wife would live. Madison rolled her eyes. Some private care place. She is not well. Grant has been dealing with it for months. Does she know about you? She barely knows what day it is. Grant entered carrying takeout and laughed. Be nice. Madison wrapped an arm around him. I am being honest. Then, she looked directly toward the visible camera Grant had disabled and raised her glass. To new beginnings. Her friends cheered. The concealed camera above the bookcase recorded all of it and hooted, Lauter. After the guests left, Madison asked whether Grant truly intended to keep my furniture. He said the valuable pieces could be sold. She pointed to my grandmother's portrait. That one is creepy. Grant replied, It will be gone before the open house. My grandmother's painted eyes seemed to watch him from the wall. The next morning, Grant brought Philip Dane into my home. Dane wore a gray suit and carried a leather folder. He walked through the rooms taking notes. In the living room, he said, The family intervention needs to appear supportive, not adversarial. You must let her become emotional on her own. Grant nodded. She will. Madison in the house will guarantee it. Dane frowned. The other woman should not be present. Madison, listening from the staircase, stepped into view. I am not hiding. Dane looked at Grant. This is unnecessarily risky. Grant smiled. Evelyn already suspects I have a colleague helping with household matters. If Madison presents herself as a support person, Evelyn will accuse us of an affair. That proves paranoia. Dane considered it. And the medication, Grant's eyes shifted toward the kitchen. She will be compliant. Dane lowered his voice. I do not want details. My role begins with the observed behavior and medical record. You will have both. Grant said, Caroline is coming. My mother is coming. The evaluator is confirmed. Once Evelyn signs the temporary management forms, the trust issue becomes procedural. Dane tapped the folder. She may refuse. Then she has an episode. We call emergency services. I petition the court before she is discharged. My stomach turned as I listened. They had planned every path. If I signed, Grant gained control. If I refused, refusal became evidence. If I became angry, anger became instability. If I remained calm, they could call it flat effect or denial. The intervention was not designed to discover truth. It was designed so every possible response supported the same conclusion. Detective Reed understood immediately. This is classic coercive framing, he said, during our encrypted call. Do not enter that house without our plan in place. He explained that the recordings alone might establish conspiracy, but the strongest case would combine them with medical evidence, forged records, financial motive, and overt action during the intervention. He wanted to identify everyone involved and determine whether Dane understood the medication scheme. Will you arrest Grant before he can hurt me again? I asked. We can seek action now. But if you are willing and medically safe, allowing the scheduled meeting under controlled conditions may establish the full conspiracy. You decide. Not us. I appreciated that. Grant's entire plan depended on taking decisions away from me. Reed made the decision mine. I thought about returning to Hawthorne House while Grant believed he controlled the cameras, witnesses, and paperwork. I thought about Madison standing in my clothes, Beatrice rehearsing concern, Caroline arriving with sympathy already shaped by lies. I thought about the pills in the evidence bag and the months of my husband telling me I could not trust my mind. I will go home, I said, but this time, I want everyone watching. The intervention was scheduled for the following Thursday at 4 p.m. 3 days after my mother's discharge. Grant believed I had learned the date accidentally because Caroline called and asked when I was coming home. In reality, the camera in my office had captured the printed invitation list on his desk. Naomi obtained a copy of the guardianship petition Dane had drafted but not yet filed. It described me as a 40-year-old woman suffering rapid cognitive decline, severe paranoia, medication noncompliance, and episodes of aggression. The petition claimed Grant had repeatedly protected me from financial mistakes. It requested emergency authority over my medical care, bank accounts, and all property in which I held a beneficial interest. Attached were statements from Beatrice, Caroline, and 2 neighbors. The neighbors had not signed anything. Their names appeared beneath summaries of casual conversations Grant had distorted. Caroline's statement was real. She wrote that I sounded suspicious and resistant to help. When Naomi showed it to me, I felt a second kind of betrayal. Caroline had not meant to harm me. But she had allowed a polished man to define her sister without asking a single direct question. I called her from the hospital terrace. Are you coming to the house Thursday? I asked. There was a long pause. Grant said you might need support. Did he ask you to sign something about my mental health, Evelyn? Please do not get angry. That is not an answer. He is scared. He says you have been forgetting things and accusing him of stealing. I looked down at the ambulance entrance where patients were being moved through automatic doors. Have you ever seen me forget where I am? No. Have you ever seen me unable to manage money? No. Have you ever asked me whether the things he told you were true? Caroline began to cry. I thought he was protecting your privacy. He was protecting his story. I wanted to tell her everything. But Detective Reed had asked me not to reveal the cameras or medication analysis until we knew whether Grant monitored her communications. I said only, "Come Thursday. Bring the original statement you signed. Do not tell Grant we spoke." "Is he hurting you?" she whispered. "Come and watch." Caroline agreed. That conversation gave me one uncertain witness. Beatrice was different. The camera showed she understood more than concern alone. She arrived at Hawthorne House Monday morning carrying garment bags and storage catalogs. Madison greeted her with a hug. Beatrice looked around the living room and said, "It already feels lighter without all of Evelyn's gloomy family things." Madison laughed. "I want to repaint after the transfer." Beatrice touched the silk scarf Madison had taken from my closet. "That color suits you better than it ever suited her." Grant entered and kissed his mother's cheek. She asked whether the trust would fund renovations once he became conservator. "Once I control distributions." "Yes," he replied. "The house needs at least $600,000 in updates before we list it." Madison frowned. "List it, I thought we were staying." Grant glanced at Beatrice. "Eventually we need liquidity. We can buy something modern." Madison's face tightened. But she said nothing. Beatrice asked how much equity he expected. Grant lowered his voice. Unaware, the concealed microphone in the bookcase had been calibrated for whispers. "The latest valuation is $4.8 million. The trust has another $3 million in investments. Her disability policy pays monthly once the medical certification is accepted. If the evaluator recommends residential care, expenses come from her funds. The rest becomes manageable." Beatrice smiled. "After everything you have endured, you deserve a life." I paused the recording. There are moments when anger becomes so complete, it feels like calm. Beatrice had sat beside my hospital bed after the first episode. She had stroked my hair and told me Grant was a saint. She knew he wanted the house. She knew the trust contained money. Whether she understood how he caused my symptoms remained unclear. But she was not an innocent mother, comforting a worried son. She was waiting for her share. Naomi traced Grant's financial motive. 18 months earlier, he had invested client referral fees in a private development scheme that collapsed. Rather than admit the loss, he borrowed against personal accounts and falsified expense reports. He owed nearly $900,000 to lenders and had promised repayment within 60 days. Madison knew about some of the debt because she had processed reimbursements. Grant told her Hawthorne House would solve everything. He told Beatrice the trust would protect the family name. He told Philip Dane I required urgent care. He told my sister he feared for my safety. He gave each person a different reason to help him. But every path ended with his control of my property. My work had taught me that fraudulent schemes survive through compartmentalization. Few participants know the entire plan. Each person tells themselves they are responsible only for one harmless part. Madison moved boxes. Beatrice signed a statement. Caroline repeated concerns. Dane drafted a petition. A doctor received carefully edited reports. Grant stood in the center connecting them. To stop him, I needed the connections visible. Detective Reed obtained a warrant related to suspected medication tampering and identity fraud. A specialized team entered Hawthorne House while Grant and Madison attended a company lunch. They did not search broadly or disturb the rooms. They collected the remaining medication, photographed the cabinet, recovered a hidden digital recorder from Grant's desk, and imaged a laptop he had left running. The security company documented the entry. When Grant returned, nothing appeared changed. The recovered files transformed our case. On the laptop were draft emails written in my name. One said I had become overwhelmed and wanted Grant to manage the trust. Another requested a leave of absence from my employer. A third admitted I had experienced delusions about my marriage. Grant had planned to send them after gaining access to my account. There were scanned copies of my signature, medical forms with dates altered, and a spreadsheet titled Transition. The columns listed house valuation, trust balance, disability payments, storage costs, care facility estimates, and projected sale proceeds. Beside a line marked Madison Housing, Grant had entered a 6-month luxury apartment lease, not permanent ownership. Beside a line marked M liability, he had written, if exposure, characterize as unauthorized medication error. He was preparing to sacrifice her. There was also a private audio diary. Grant had recorded notes after each episode. Perhaps believing documentation would help his guardianship claim. His voice was clinical. March 12, E consumed prepared tea at 7:40. Symptoms began at 8:15. Witness Beatrice. Reaction stronger than expected. No lasting issue. Another entry said, April 27, public confusion achieved. Video secured. E, increasingly defensive. Caroline receptive. I had investigated criminals who created better evidence against themselves. But none had slept beside me. Reed warned me that the audio might provoke defense challenges. Yet combined with the camera footage and laboratory results, it was devastating. The final analysis from Dr. Devanak. Ortiz confirmed my medication had been deliberately altered with substances inconsistent with the prescription and capable of causing sedation, disorientation, and impaired coordination. She would not use the word poisoning casually. But she was clear the condition of the pills could not be explained by ordinary pharmacy error. The dispensing pharmacy produced sealed control samples. They did not match what Grant packed for me. My health record showed no diagnosis supporting his claims. The physician he cited had never authorized him to modify or manage my medicine. The next step was personal rather than legal. I had to return to the house and see what remained of my life. Under Reed's plan, I would enter Thursday at 4. But until then, Grant needed to believe I was weak, uncertain, and alone. I called him Tuesday evening. Madison was in the primary bedroom, visible on the hallway feed as she carried my shoes into the closet. Grant answered on the third ring. How are you feeling? He asked. Tired. I said, I forgot where I put my hospital parking ticket this morning. The statement was deliberate. Grant became attentive. That worries me. Evain. It was probably nothing. These things are happening more often. Maybe. He lowered his voice into the gentle tone he used for witnesses. I have asked a few people to be at the house when you return. No one wants to upset you. We just need a conversation. Who, Caroline? Mom. A care specialist. Maybe Madison from work. Because she has helped me organize things. I let silence stretch. Why would Madison be in our house? She has been assisting with paperwork. Do not make this into something it is not. The camera showed Madison stop in the hallway and listen. I am not making anything. I said, Good. Thursday at 4. I will send a car. I can drive. I do not think that is safe. Grant. I have driven to the hospital every day. His voice hardened for one instant. Please do not fight me on every small thing. Then he softened again. Let me take care of you. I agreed to the car. He ended the call and turned to Madison. She is already defensive. Perfect. Madison looked toward the bedroom. What if she recognizes the dress? She was holding the blue silk dress I had worn to my grandmother's memorial. Grant shrugged. Wear something else during the meeting. Afterward. It will not matter. Afterward. Madison repeated. When exactly am I allowed to stop hiding? Grant kissed her forehead. When the order is signed, and then we live here. We start our life. He did not answer the question. Madison noticed. Over the next day, her confidence changed. She began searching through Grant's office when he showered. She photographed papers. She opened the transition spreadsheet, but closed it before reaching the liability line. She called a friend and said Grant seemed evasive about the house. He promised it would be ours. She said, Now he keeps talking about selling Her friend asked whether she trusted him. Madison answered, "He left his wife for me." The friend replied, "He has not left her. He moved you into her house while she was gone." Madison became angry and ended the call. Yet the sentence remained in the room. On Wednesday afternoon, Grant met Dane and Beatrice in the dining room to rehearse the intervention. They arranged chairs in a semicircle. My grandmother's antique table had been pushed aside. On a small tray, Grant placed a glass pitcher, cups, and a medication container. Dane reviewed the script. Begin with concern. Avoid accusations. Ask her to acknowledge recent incidents. If she becomes agitated, the evaluator documents it. If she refuses medication, document noncompliance. If she attempts to leave, explain that driving is unsafe. And if she stays calm, Beatrice asked. Dane replied. Grant presents the financial irregularities. Those irregularities were fabricated transfers Grant had initiated from a joint account and labeled with my initials. She will object. Grant said, Then I produce the emails, which she will deny. Dane added, supporting paranoia and memory loss. What about the house? Madison asked from the doorway. Dane looked irritated. The house is not discussed until authority is established. I live here now. No. Dane said, You are temporarily present as an employee supporting Mr. Taperley. Mistress. Madison crossed her arms. My last name is Vale, and I am not his employee at home. Grant stood quickly. Madison. Not now. She stared at him. You told me she would sign and leave. She will. You told me the house would be ours. Beatrice gave Madison a cold look. My son has more important concerns than satisfying your impatience. Madison's face flushed. For the first time, she understood. Beatrice did not see her as a future daughter-in-law. She saw her as useful. Grant took Madison into the kitchen. The microphone followed their raised whispers. Do not ruin this, he said. Everything depends on tomorrow. Everything for whom? For us. Then put my name on the new property paperwork. We do not own anything yet. You said you did. Grant grabbed her wrist. Lower your voice. Madison pulled away. Do not touch me. He immediately apologized and blamed stress. She allowed him to embrace her, but her eyes remained open over his shoulder. At 1138 that night, Madison returned alone to the office. She copied files from Grant's laptop onto a small drive. She still did not know. The cameras watched her. I did not know whether she planned to protect herself, blackmail him, or leave. But I knew the alliance was cracking. Naomi suggested contacting Madison before the intervention. Reed advised against it. She has participated in unlawful entry, removal of property, and possibly medication handling. He said, We do not know whether she will cooperate or warn him. I agreed. Madison had walked into my home, worn my clothes, mocked my illness, and helped Grant pack my belongings. Being deceived by him did not make her innocent. She would get an opportunity to choose truth when the evidence appeared. I would not rescue her in advance. Thursday morning. My mother sat at the breakfast table in her recovery suite while I dressed. I chose a charcoal suit, low heels, and the pearl earrings my grandmother gave me. My mother watched me fasten them. Are you afraid? She asked. Yes. Good. Fear means you understand the danger. Courage is going anyway with people who know where you are. I smiled. That sounds like something grandmother would say. She said it to me when I divorced your father. My mother reached into her bag and handed me an old brass key. It had once opened Hawthorne House before the locks were modernized. This does not work anymore. I said, It is not for the door. It is to remind you whose hands kept that house alive. I closed my fingers around it. At noon, Naomi confirmed the trust had formally invoked the misconduct provision based on preliminary evidence. Grant's occupancy privilege would terminate the moment he received notice. The bank froze pending trust distributions. My employer revoked the fraudulent leave request. The insurance carrier placed a hold on every disability submission associated with Grant. Dr. Ortiz prepared to appear by secure video. Detective Reed and 2 officers would wait in the detached carriage house with access through the service drive. A forensic technician monitored every camera. Caroline agreed to wear an audio transmitter. Though she did not yet know the full story, the evaluator Grant hired, Dr. Owen Park, had been contacted by law enforcement. He was shocked to learn the records provided to him were disputed. He agreed to attend and observe without revealing the investigation. Philip Dane remained unaware. The car Grant sent arrived at the hospital residence. The driver opened the rear door and called me Mrs. Mercer. I placed my small bag beside me and watched the city move past the window. Grant texted twice. "We are all here because we love you." Then, "Please do not create a scene." I replied, "I understand." Hawthorne House appeared at the end of the tree-lined street. Sunlight touched the slate roof and upper windows. The house looked unchanged from the outside. Inside, nearly every relationship connected to it had been rearranged. The car stopped. I touched the old brass key in my pocket, stepped onto the driveway, and saw Madison watching from behind my grandmother's lace curtain. She disappeared before I reached the front steps. Grant opened the door wearing the expression of a man greeting a fragile patient. "Evain," he said softly. "You are home." I looked past him at the boxes labeled with my name. "Am I?" Grant's smile tightened. "Of course you are home." He stepped aside and reached for my bag. I kept it. The front hall smelled different. Madison's perfume hung beneath the familiar scent of old wood and beeswax. My grandmother's umbrella stand had been moved. 2 framed photographs were missing from the side table. A pair of red heels sat beside the staircase, as casually as if they belonged there. Grant followed my gaze. "Madison has been helping organize things." "I see." He waited for anger. I gave him none. In the living room, 8 chairs formed a semicircle facing the fireplace. Beatrice sat in the center wearing a pale suit and an expression of rehearsed sorrow. Caroline sat beside her, twisting a folded statement in her hands. Philip Dane occupied the chair nearest the coffee table. Leather folder open on his lap. Dr. Owen Park sat slightly apart, observing. 2 neighbors, Helen and Thomas Briggs, looked deeply uncomfortable. They had apparently been invited as concerned friends. Madison stood near the window in a dress from her own closet, but my grandmother's sapphire brooch was pinned to her shoulder. Grant had given it to her. The moment I saw it, something inside me became perfectly still. "Evain," Beatrice said, rising halfway. "We are so relieved you came willingly. Was there another way you expected me to arrive?" Her eyes flicked toward Grant. He touched my elbow. I moved before he could guide me. "Let us sit," he said. "Everyone here loves you." I chose a chair outside the semicircle, positioning myself where the camera above the bookcase had an unobstructed view. Grant frowned. "That seat is not part of the arrangement." "I prefer it." Dane cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mercer. My name is Philip Dane. Your husband retained me to help your family address several urgent concerns. I know who you are." His eyebrows lifted. "Have we met? No?" I let the answer sit. Grant moved to the fireplace and began the performance he had rehearsed. "Evain, the past 6 months have been frightening. You have experienced memory loss, confusion, files, and paranoia. You have refused consistent treatment. You have made questionable financial decisions. We are not blaming you. We believe you need help. Beatrice dabbed the corner of one eye with a tissue. Caroline stared at the floor. The neighbors shifted in their chairs. Madison watched me with open challenge. I asked, "Which questionable financial decisions?" Grant looked relieved. He had expected that question. He opened a folder and removed several statements. These transfers, you moved money among accounts and denied doing it. He passed copies around. I recognized the transactions Naomi had traced to Grant's device. And you believe I initiated them. The records use your credentials. That was not my question. He sighed for the audience. This defensiveness is what worries us. Dane leaned forward. No one is trying to take anything from you. We are discussing temporary support. He slid a document across the table. This authorizes your husband to assist with medical decisions and routine financial management for 90 days. The first page used gentle language. The later pages granted Grant broad control over every account. Trust distribution, insurance claim, and real property decision. Routine. I repeated. It is temporary. Dane said, if your condition improves, authority returns. And if I refuse, Grant stepped closer. Why would you refuse help from your husband? Perhaps because my husband moved another woman into my house. The room changed. Beatrice inhaled sharply. Caroline looked up. The neighbors stared at Madison. Grant did not panic. He had prepared for this. Evain, he said softly. Madison is here because she has helped me manage the household while you were away. Your belief that she is my mistress is exactly the kind of paranoid conclusion we have been discussing. Madison folded her arms. I knew she would attack me. Grant looked at the witnesses with sad confirmation. You see, Caroline opened her mouth. But I met her eyes and gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. Is that your explanation for her clothes being upstairs? I asked. She has stayed in the guest room during long work days. My clothes. You have been giving things away and forgetting. Beatrice nodded eagerly. You gave me a scarf and later accused me of taking it. Which scarf? I asked. She hesitated. The green one. I have never owned a green scarf. Her face tightened. Grant intervened. This is not a trial. No. I said. Trials require evidence. Dane raised a calming hand. Mrs. Mercer. Antagonism will not help anyone. Doctor. Park is here to assess whether immediate support is appropriate. I recommend you cooperate. Doctor. Park spoke for the first time. I am here to observe. I have not reached any conclusion. Grant looked briefly annoyed. The rehearsed evaluator was not following the script. He turned back to me. You have also stopped taking prescribed medication. Which medication? The one in your bag. How do you know what is in my bag? He paused. I packed it. And you have been very concerned that I take it. Because I care about you. Then perhaps we should discuss what care looked like Tuesday morning at 8:14. Madison's face lost color. Grant's expression remained controlled. But his right hand closed around the folder. I do not know what you mean. Of course you do. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. Play kitchen camera. Tuesday. 8:14 a.m. The television above the side cabinet turned on. Grant spun toward it. The screen showed the kitchen exactly as it had appeared through my application. Madison stood at the island stirring coffee. Grant opened my medication cabinet. Her recorded voice filled the room. Are you sure the medicine will be enough? On the screen? Grant lifted the bottle. It worked last month. She thought the dizziness was stress. When she comes home, I will make sure she has another episode in front of witnesses. After that, the emergency paperwork takes care of everything. The recording ended. No one moved. The old clock in the hall ticked loudly. Beatrice's tissue lowered. Caroline covered her mouth. Thomas Briggs whispered, Dear God, Dane looked at Grant. Then at the television, his face turning gray. Grant recovered first. That is fabricated. Is it? I asked. You work in insurance fraud. You know how to manipulate video. His voice grew louder. This is exactly what I warned everyone about. She constructs elaborate theories. I tapped the phone again. Play entry hall. Saturday. 10:14 p.m. The screen changed. Grant entered my office, searched my desk, removed trust documents, and called Dane. His recorded voice said, I found the original schedule. The occupancy clause is exactly where you said. Dane's voice answered through the speaker. Then you need the incapacity order before you attempt any transfer. Without it, the spouse has no standing. Every person in the room turned toward Dane. He stood abruptly. I was discussing a lawful petition based on information provided by Mr. Lee. Mercer. I had no knowledge of medication interference. Sit down. Philip. Grant snapped. Dane stared at him. Do not address me as though I am part of this. Madison moved away from the window. You said the cameras were off. Grant ignored her. He pointed at me. She illegally recorded private conversations. Naomi's voice came through the television speakers before I answered. The recordings were made by a security system installed in property controlled by the Mercer Family Preservation Trust. In common areas covered by posted security notice, Mr. Mercer. Your attempt to disable the visible system and subsequent unauthorized entry into secured rooms were also logged. The living room doors opened. Naomi walked in carrying a slim black case. Behind her came a forensic security technician and a uniformed trust officer. Grant's face finally cracked. How did you get in? Naomi held up an electronic access card. Through the door owned by my client's trust. Beatrice Rose. This is outrageous. Evelyn invited us here. Grant invited you. I said. I simply allowed his meeting to occur. Madison stared between Naomi and the camera. How long have you been watching long enough? Her eyes dropped to the sapphire brooch. She unclipped it quickly and placed it on the mantel. Grant gave me that. I know. He said it belonged to his family. It belonged to my grandmother. Grant moved toward me. Evain. Stop this. You are humiliating yourself. The contradiction was almost beautiful. He had brought witnesses to strip me of legal control. Moved his mistress into my home. Altered my medicine. And still believed humiliation belonged to me. I have not begun. I said. I tapped the phone. Play Friday. Devitt 3 p.m. The screen showed Madison entertaining friends. She wore my black dress and lifted a glass. The house is practically mine already. Grant only needs the court to agree that she cannot take care of herself. Her friend asked where I would live. Madison answered. Some private care place. She is not well. Grant entered the frame and laughed. The clip ended. Madison's face flushed. I was repeating what he told me. You were wearing my clothes while you said it. He said you had given them away. Did he also say I gave away my bed? Beatrice made a disapproving sound. There is no need for vulgarity. I turned to her. You discussed using $600,000 from my trust to renovate this house before selling it. Her lips parted. I never. The next clip played before she finished. Beatrice sat in the same living room saying, After everything you have endured, you deserve a life. Grant described the valuation. Trust investments. Disability payments. And care facility expenses. Beatrice asked about renovation funding. The clip stopped on her satisfied smile. Caroline looked at her with disgust. You knew he wanted Evelyn's money. Beatrice drew herself up. I believed my son was preparing for his wife's care. You discussed selling her home. Caroline said, because he told me it was financially responsible. He told me she was getting lost. Caroline whispered. He told all of us different things. Grant stepped between them. Do not let Evelyn turn this family against itself. You did that? Caroline said. She unfolded the statement in her hands. You wrote this. You asked me to sign it after telling me she could not remember our conversations. She looked at me, tears running down her face. I am sorry. Keep the original Pay-6, Naomi said. Detective Reed will need it. Grant's head snapped toward the door. Detective, I saw the moment he realized law enforcement might be close. He glanced toward the hallway, calculating distance to the back entrance. The security technician shifted subtly, blocking the path. Dane closed his folder. I am leaving, Naomi said. You may remain voluntarily or speak with investigators outside. I recommend you preserve every communication with Mr. Seri and Mercer. Dane looked at Grant with open fury. You told me your wife had a diagnosed degenerative condition. She does. No. Doctor, Park said. Everyone turned to him. He placed a sealed file on the table, the records I received from Mr. Paste. Mercer included summaries not supported by the treating physicians. I spoke with Dr. Ortiz this morning. Mrs. Mercer has no diagnosis matching the petition. The episodes described require investigation for external cause. Grant's voice rose. She manipulated him too. Doctor. Park remained calm. I reviewed raw laboratory reports. Your interpretation is not medically credible. Grant pointed at the glass pitcher on the tray. This is madness. Evelyn comes home with edited recordings, lawyers, and accusations. And somehow, I am the unstable one. No one called you unstable. I said, we called you recorded. Madison took another step away from him. What did you actually put in her medicine? Grant turned on her. Nothing. Do not be stupid. I asked you on camera. You did not know what you were talking about. You told me it worked. You were nervous. I reassured you. She stared at him. You said if anything went wrong, we would handle it together. Grant's expression changed from charm to contempt. You moved into another woman's house and wore her clothes. Do not suddenly pretend you are innocent. Madison flinched. You invited me. And you came. I watched their alliance fracture exactly as the camera footage predicted. Grant had built his plan by making every participant believe they were protected by him. Once that belief disappeared, loyalty vanished with it. Madison looked at me. He told me you were already ill before we met. He was lying. He said you had agreed to residential care. He was lying. He said the trust would become his. He was lying. She swallowed. He said we would live here. He planned to sell it. Grant shouted. Enough. The force of his voice echoed through the room. Helen Briggs began crying. Thomas stood as though ready to leave. Grant grabbed the temporary authority document and thrust it toward me. Sign this now. You need treatment. Everything happening proves it. I looked at the pen in his hand. You still think I am going to sign? If you refuse? I will file the emergency petition tonight. With what medical evidence I have months of records. Naomi opened her black case and removed a printed report. You mean these records? She laid them on the table. The records created through unauthorized calls, altered summaries, forged electronic requests, and video clips missing their original context. Grant stared. Naomi placed a second report beside the first. Or do you mean the independent laboratory analysis confirming that medication in Mrs. Point? Mercer's possession had been intentionally altered. Madison made a small choking sound. Beatrice sat down heavily. Grant's face became blank. For the first time, he had no prepared expression. That is impossible, he said. The container was sealed. Silence followed. Grant realized what he had admitted. Naomi did not smile. Which container did you believe was sealed? Mr. Mercer. He looked toward the door again. I touched my phone. Play office audio diary. March 12. His own voice filled the room. E consumed prepared tea at 7:40. Symptoms began at 8:15. Witness Beatrice. Reaction stronger than expected. No lasting issue. Beatrice turned slowly toward her son. What did you do? Grant shook his head. That is not me. The next entry played. April 27. Public confusion achieved. Video secured. E increasingly defensive. Caroline receptive. Caroline stood. You used me. Caroline. Listen, you made her sick and called me, so I would help you prove it. I never made anyone sick. Then why did you record the results? He had no answer. The television screen went dark. In the silence. Doctor. Park reached for the water pitcher. Has anyone consumed anything prepared in this room? He asked. No one had. The technician photographed the tray. Naomi said, Do not touch it further. Grant laughed suddenly. Too loudly. You have all lost perspective. This is a family misunderstanding, turned into theater by a vindictive wife. Madison handled household tasks. She may have made mistakes. I cannot be responsible for everything she did while I was working. Madison stared at him. What are you saying? I am saying you had access to the medication. Because you gave it to me. There is no proof of that. I tapped the phone one more time. Play office. Monday. Enist 16:47 M. The screen showed Grant alone at his desk, speaking into his recorder. If exposure occurs, characterize medication issue as Madison's unauthorized attempt to help her access and messages create plausible responsibility. Maintain separation from direct handling. Madison's mouth opened. Grant lunged toward the television. The security technician stepped in front of him. Do not touch the equipment. You are going to blame me. Madison said. Grant turned. That note is fake. I heard your voice. Evelyn made it. I watched you record notes on that phone. Madison, you promised we were a team. You were useful. He snapped. The words escaped before he could retrieve them. Madison's face changed. Whatever fantasy remained vanished. She reached into her handbag and removed a small drive. I copied his laptop last night, she said. Grant went pale. Give me that. She backed away. There are emails, account numbers, and the spreadsheet about selling the house. There is a line with my name and the word liability. You stole confidential files. You plan to send me to prison. You are already going to prison if you hand that over. Madison looked at Naomi. Can I speak to the police? Naomi answered. You may request counsel and cooperate. That does not erase your conduct. I understand. Grant moved again. But this time, Thomas Briggs blocked him. Stay where you are, the older man said. Grant looked around the room for someone still on his side. Beatrice would not meet his eyes. Caroline stood beside me. Dane had moved near the doorway. Distancing himself. Doctor. Park watched with clinical disgust. Madison held the drive against her chest. The man who had controlled every version of the story was suddenly surrounded by people comparing notes. I rose from my chair. There is one issue left. I said, This house. Grant seized the opening. Yes. Our house. Whatever happens between us. I have legal occupancy as your husband. Naomi removed a sealed envelope. Had legal occupancy. She handed it to him. The Mercer Family Preservation Trust has invoked Article 12, the fraud and coercion provision. Your right to occupy this property terminated at noon today based on documented attempts to obtain control through manufactured incapacity and medical interference. Grant tore open the envelope and scanned the notice. You cannot evict me from my marital home without a court order. This property is not marital property, Naomi said. It is trust-held real estate. Your limited occupancy license was conditional, revocable, and never an ownership interest. Temporary protective orders have been filed. Law enforcement has copies. I paid for renovations. You submitted invoices to the trust and were reimbursed, however Mannanen too. The trust owns every permanent improvement. I live here. Not after today. Madison whispered. You told me your name was on the deed. Grant ignored her. Naomi continued. The trust has also frozen all discretionary benefits, revoked your access credentials, and notified the insurer, bank, and property manager. You have no authority over this house, its contents, or Mrs. Mercer's accounts. Grant looked at me as though the betrayal were mine. You planned this. No. I said, you planned it. I documented it. Then the doors behind Naomi opened, and Detective Reed entered with 2 officers. Grant's shoulders dropped by less than an inch. But I saw it. He had finally reached the part of the evening he had not scripted. Detective Reed did not rush toward Grant or raise his voice. He entered as if arriving for a scheduled appointment, which in a sense he was. Grant Mercer, he said. We need to speak with you regarding suspected medication tampering, fraudulent medical documentation, attempted financial exploitation, and conspiracy to obtain control of trust property. Grant held the termination notice in one hand. This is a domestic dispute. You may explain that with counsel present. Reed looked at the tray beside the fireplace. No one touches the pitcher, glasses, medication container, or documents. One officer began photographing the room. The other stood near the hall. Madison raised the drive. I have files. Reed nodded. Keep it where it is until an evidence technician can receive it. Grant looked at her with naked hatred. You are destroying your own life. Madison's voice shook. You already planned to destroy it. Beatrice stepped toward Reed. My son is a respected financial professional. Surely you cannot accept edited home videos as proof. Reed turned to her. Mrs. Mercer, you are free to leave after providing identification. Unless you prefer to remain and give a voluntary statement, I have done nothing. Then a truthful statement should help. She sat again. The certainty drained from her posture. Grant addressed me directly. Evain. Tell them to stop. For 12 years. That command had worked in smaller forms. Tell the waiter the order is fine. Tell your sister I did not mean it. Tell the accountant the transfer was authorized. Tell the doctor you are feeling better. Tell my mother we are happy. He had trained me to smooth the surface after every selfish act. He assumed the habit would survive attempted erasure. No. I said, you do not understand what this will do to us. There is no us left to protect. You are emotional. I am informed. He laughed bitterly. You think these people care about you, Naomi Bills, the trust? Reed wants a case. Madison wants immunity. Caroline wants forgiveness. I am the only person who stayed when you were sick. You made me sick. You cannot prove that. Reed said, Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise you to stop speaking. Grant ignored him. Evain. The pills could have been altered by anyone. You travel. You leave medication in hotel rooms. Madison had access. Your mother had access. Even you could have done it, and forgotten. That final cruelty was his purest instinct, when evidence trapped him. He tried to return doubt to my own mind. I looked at the man I had loved and realized there was nothing left in his face I needed to understand. The pharmacy control samples do not match the pills you packed. I said, your access to the cabinet is recorded. Your voice diary documents each episode. Your drafts describe the result you wanted. Your financial records show why you wanted it. And your plan for tonight is sitting on this table. Circumstantial. Then let a court decide. Reed stepped forward. Grant Mercer. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Beatrice cried out. Grant did not move. You are not arresting me in my own home. Naomi replied before Reed could. It is not your home. The sentence struck harder than shouting could have. Grant looked around the living room, the fireplace he claimed to have restored. The shelves he filled with photographs of himself. The antique rug he once called outdated. The staircase where Madison's suitcases had stood. For years. He had treated possession as ownership. Now every object remained while his right to occupy disappeared. Reed repeated the instruction. Grant's shoulders stiffened. He considered resisting, then saw the second officer ready. Slowly. He turned. The handcuffs clicked behind his back. Madison began crying. Not for him, I think, but for the collapse of the future she had imagined. Beatrice covered her face. Caroline stood beside me without touching me, understanding I needed space. Dane watched from the doorway with the expression of a man calculating professional consequences. Reed read Grant his rights. Grant looked over his shoulder at me. After everything I did for you. You mean everything you did to me? You will regret this when the charges fall apart. Perhaps. But I will regret silence more. The officers began leading him toward the front hall. He stopped beneath my grandmother's portrait. For 1 second, his eyes moved upward to the small concealed camera integrated into the molding. The green status light was almost invisible. He saw it because the technician had deliberately activated the indicator. His face changed. Until then, part of him still believed we had only selected clips. In that moment, he understood the house had recorded weeks of movement, months of access logs, and every attempt to remove my belongings. How many? He whispered. Enough, I said. He was escorted past the boxes labeled with my name and out through the same front door Madison had entered with her suitcases. Neighbors had begun gathering across the street. Grant lowered his head as he was placed in the police car. Appearances had always mattered to him. He had staged my illness in public because witnesses made lies feel official. Now witnesses watched the truth take him away. The front door closed. For a few seconds, no one in the living room spoke. Then, Reed's team began the careful work that always follows dramatic moments. Evidence tags replaced accusations. Photographs replaced emotion. The tray was sealed. Documents were collected. Devices were identified H&7. Madison was advised of her rights and taken to another room with an attorney provided through the duty system. Dane surrendered his folder and phone voluntarily after Naomi reminded him that deletion would create additional problems. Dr. Park prepared a statement describing the unsupported medical claims. The neighbors confirmed Grant had told them I wandered outside at night. Something neither had ever seen. Beatrice demanded to leave. Reed allowed it after taking her contact information and warning her not to remove or destroy records. She approached me at the door. You have ruined this family, she said. Grant did that. A wife does not hand her husband to the police. A husband does not manufacture his wife's illness to steal her home. He was under pressure. So was I. Every time the room spun, while he held my hand and lied to the paramedics. She looked away. You always believed you were better than us because of this house. No. You believed the house made me better than you. That is why you wanted it. Beatrice's face hardened. You will be alone. That was the threat Grant depended on. I opened the door. Leave. She stepped onto the porch, then turned as though expecting me to call her back. I did not. Caroline remained. When the last officer left the living room, she placed her signed statement on the table. I should have called you, she said. Yes. She winced at the direct answer. I thought I was respecting your privacy. You were respecting his control. I know. You signed a statement about my mind without speaking to me. I know. Tears filled her eyes. I am not asking you to forgive me tonight. Good. She nodded. I will give Reed every message. I will tell the court exactly how Grant manipulated me. Do that because it is true. Not because you want forgiveness. I will. We stood in the room where we had played as children when our grandmother was alive. Caroline looked toward the portrait. She would have thrown him out herself. She might have thrown all of us out. Caroline laughed through tears. The sound relieved something, but not enough to repair us. Repair would require time and consistent truth. I told her she could stay in the guest room at the hospital residence, not Hawthorne House. I needed the house empty. Madison emerged from the study with an officer and a public defender. Her mascara had streaked. She wore her own coat over the dress. Before leaving, she stopped several feet from me. I did not know he was making you sick at first, she said. At first I knew he was giving you something to make you calm. He said your doctor approved it. Later, when he talked about an episode, I understood it was not normal. And you stayed. She looked at the floor. He said if I left, he would blame me. He had messages where I asked about the medicine. You also moved into my house. He told me you were never coming back. And that made wearing my clothes acceptable. No. The honesty surprised me. No? It did not. She took the sapphire brooch from her pocket and held it out. The officer had apparently allowed her to return it before processing. I did not take it from her hand. Place it on the table. She did. There are other things upstairs, she said. Jewelry. Clothes. I did not take them outside the house. You invited friends here. I know. You helped pack my belongings. I know. You described me as a sick woman who should be removed. I believed him. But I also wanted the house. I wanted the life. I told myself that made what I was doing less cruel. She swallowed. It did not. I looked at her for a long moment. Cooperate fully. Return everything. Tell the truth, even when it makes you look guilty. Will you ask them to be lenient? No. She nodded as though she expected nothing else. He told me you were weak. He needed both of us to believe that. The officer escorted her out. Madison's rose gold suitcases remained upstairs. I asked the evidence technician not to move them until they were photographed. By 9 that evening, the house was finally quiet. Naomi stood with me in the kitchen while technicians finished sealing the medication cabinet. You should not sleep here tonight, she said. I know. The locks will be changed. The trust can provide security. I know. You did well. I looked at the island where Grant had prepared my tea, arranged pills, and discussed my incapacity. I do not feel like I did well. Survival rarely feels graceful while it is happening. She handed me the brass key my mother had given me. I had placed it on the table during the meeting without realizing. Keep this. It no longer opens anything. Neither did Grant's confidence. I almost smiled. Before leaving, I walked through each room with a photographer documenting the condition. The dining room held the chairs from the intervention. My office drawers were open. The trust envelope was missing but already recovered. In the guest room, Madison's cosmetics covered the vanity. In the primary closet, my clothes had been pushed to one side or packed into boxes. Some garments were stained. A pair of shoes lay broken beneath the bench. On my bed, the sheets were new. Grant had replaced the embroidered set my mother gave us at our wedding. I stood in the doorway and felt the delayed force of violation. People often speak of adultery as though the central injury is sexual. For me, the deepest injury was occupation. They had entered the place where I slept. Open drawers, my grandmother once used. Touched letters from my father. Tried on my history. and discussed removing me as though I were clutter. Grant did not merely want another woman. He wanted another woman wearing my life. I found our wedding photograph inside a box marked Due Nate. The glass had cracked. In the picture, I was 28 and smiling at a man I believed would protect the quiet parts of me. Grant looked proud, hopeful, almost young. I sat on the floor holding the frame. For the first time since the camera alert, I cried without watching a clock. I cried for the woman in the photograph. For the months I doubted my mind. For every dose I took because my husband reminded me. For my sister's signature. For my mother recovering while I pretended not to be terrified. And even for the version of Grant, who may once have loved me before entitlement, consumed whatever love remained. Naomi found me there 20 minutes later. She did not tell me to stop. She sat beside me among the boxes until I could breathe normally. Then she helped me place the photograph face down. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked. "Arraignment. Protective orders. Employment notification. Trust, litigation. And the beginning of a divorce." That sounds like a list from work. Lists keep chaos from pretending it is infinite. She was right. The next morning, I began one. The list began with practical actions. Change every lock. Reset every password. Inventory every object. Revoke every authorization. Inform my employer. Request a new medical record number and security phrase. Freeze credit. Notify insurers. Preserve messages. Photograph bruises from prior falls. Schedule a full examination. File for divorce. Beneath those items, I wrote one sentence in capital letters: "Do not let Grant define what happened." He had spent months creating a narrative in which he was the devoted husband and I was the unstable wife. Arrest did not automatically erase that story. People who had heard only his version would continue repeating it, unless evidence replaced rumor. My employer, Caldwell Mutual Investigations, placed me on paid leave at my request. Not because of Grant's fraudulent email. The chief compliance officer visited me at Naomi's office. She had worked with me for 9 years and looked furious. Grant contacted Human Resources twice. She said, "He said you were experiencing progressive impairment and might mishandle confidential cases." We did not act because he lacked authorization. But he was persistent. "Did he send video a clip from the dinner?" She showed me the file. It began as I lost my sentence and ended with Grant guiding me into a chair. It did not show him handing me sparkling water beforehand. The metadata showed the file had been edited on his laptop. He wanted my career gone before he filed the petition. I said, "He wanted everyone to think removing you was responsible." Caldwell retained independent counsel and turned over every communication. My active cases were audited. The audit found no errors, missed deadlines, or cognitive decline. The report became important later because Grant's petition claimed my professional judgment had deteriorated. Evidence of competent work did not prove I was healthy in every respect. But it exposed the gap between his claims and reality. Ellison Wealth Management acted even faster. Grant's arrest triggered an internal review of expense reports, client contact, and access records. Investigators found he had diverted referral fees, created false vendor payments, and used confidential client information to obtain personal loans. Madison's account access appeared in several transactions. She admitted processing reimbursements after Grant told. Some were clearly personal luxury hotel stays, jewelry, renovations planned for Hawthorne House, and payments to Philip Dane's firm. Others funded the failed development scheme that created his debt. Ellison suspended Grant immediately, revoked his credentials, and notified regulators. The firm issued a statement describing him as a former employee before his first court appearance ended. Grant had spent years treating his title as proof of superiority. It vanished in one paragraph. At arraignment, he wore a county-issued uniform instead of a tailored suit. the prosecutor described a pattern of medical interference, identity misuse, attempted guardianship fraud, and financial exploitation. His attorney argued the evidence was being misinterpreted by an angry spouse. He called the camera recordings selective and the medication results inconclusive. The judge listened, then reviewed the audio diary entry in which Grant documented prepared tea and public confusion achieved. Bail was set high. Electronic monitoring ordered, and contact with me prohibited. Beatrice attempted to secure his release by offering her home as collateral, but investigators had already placed a notice on the property because funds from Grant's questionable accounts had paid part of its mortgage. She left the courthouse surrounded by reporters. For the first time, the family name she worshipped became associated not with wealth management but with exploitation. Grant called me from jail through his attorney on the third day, requesting permission to retrieve personal items from Hawthorne House. Naomi handled the response. He could provide a list. A bonded moving company supervised by the trust would pack only verified personal property. He would not enter the house. His first list included paintings, silver, wine, furniture, and a collection of antique watch. Nearly everything belonged to the trust or to me before marriage. His second list included gifts he claimed to have purchased. Receipts showed I had purchased them. His final approved property fit into 17 boxes: clothing, books, family photographs, personal electronics after forensic imaging, and awards from Ellison that the company later asked him to return. The removal took 4 hours. I did not attend. When I came back, the empty side of the closet looked less like loss than reclaimed air. Madison spent 2 nights in custody before her attorney negotiated release conditioned on cooperation. She gave investigators the copied laptop files, her messages with Grant, photographs of documents, and access to a cloud account where he stored edited videos. Her messages were ugly. She mocked me, celebrated my symptoms, asked when I would be gone, and sent links to furniture she wanted for the house. She also repeatedly asked whether the medication was safe and whether Grant had legal authority. Those questions did not absolve her, but they showed how he controlled information. She believed enough to participate and doubted enough to protect herself. Prosecutors charged her with conspiracy, unlawful access to property, evidence concealment, and participation in fraudulent financial transactions. The most serious medical charge remained focused on Grant because the available evidence showed he obtained, altered, and administered the medication. Madison admitted she once moved the container at his request and delivered a sealed envelope to Dane. She claimed she never personally changed a pill. The evidence supported that distinction. Public opinion tried to turn Madison and me into competing women. Headlines called her the mistress in the mansion and me the hidden camera wife. Commenters debated whether she deserved sympathy. I refused every interview. This was not a contest over which woman Grant loved more. Love was no longer relevant to the criminal conduct. Madison had harmed me. Grant had deceived her. Both things could be true. I would not flatten the facts into a simple rivalry because Grant's entire scheme had relied on keeping women suspicious of each other while he moved freely between their trust. Caroline gave a full statement and surrendered months of messages. The messages showed Grant escalating slowly. He began with ordinary concern: Evelyn seems tired. Then small incidents: she misplaced a document. Then fear: she accused me of hiding money. Finally urgency: I may need legal authority to keep her safe. He attached edited clips and asked Caroline to confirm she had also noticed changes. Caroline, ashamed that she had not, began reinterpreting old conversations. A missed birthday call became memory loss. My refusal to discuss private finances became secrecy. Grant taught her what to see. On the witness stand at a preliminary hearing, Caroline explained the process clearly. He did not ask me to lie. She said, he gave me a story, and asked me to search my memories for anything that matched it. That sentence helped investigators understand how several witnesses became tools without knowing the whole plan. Beatrice was less cooperative. She denied knowledge of medication, interference, and claimed every financial discussion concerned my future care. Yet her bank records showed Grant transferred $85,000 to her over 18 months. Some payments were labeled family support. Others came from the same accounts connected to false Ellison expenses. She had used the money to renovate her kitchen and pay club dues. Prosecutors eventually charged her with receiving proceeds of fraud and making false statements in the guardianship preparation. The case against her was narrower than the case against Grant. But the social consequences were immediate. She resigned from 2 charitable boards after members requested her removal. Friends who had praised her family loyalty stopped answering invitations. She sent me a letter blaming Madison, stress, and my cold determination to punish everyone. I returned it unopened through counsel. Philip Dane faced a professional investigation. His records showed he accepted Grant's claims without contacting my physician, reviewed trust documents obtained from my locked office, and drafted emergency papers containing unsupported allegations. However, no evidence proved he knew the medication had been altered before the intervention. He claimed Grant deceived him. That was likely true. But deception did not excuse his willingness to build a case without basic verification. The disciplinary board suspended him pending review. He later surrendered his license for 2 years and paid a civil settlement to the trust. Dr. Park, by contrast, became an important witness. He explained how Grant attempted to use clinical language without clinical foundation. Concern is not diagnosis. He testified, "A spouse's report can be relevant, but when the report consistently benefits that spouse and conflicts with objective records, it requires scrutiny." His testimony helped the judge dismiss every temporary incapacity request and issue a permanent finding that I retained full legal capacity. The judgment should have felt unnecessary. I knew my own mind, yet after months of hearing Grant describe me as confused. Seeing a court formally reject his story mattered more than I expected. The divorce unfolded alongside the criminal case. Grant demanded spousal support, arguing that loss of employment left him financially dependent. Naomi responded with evidence that he lost his income through intentional misconduct and had attempted to appropriate my separate assets. The court denied temporary support. He claimed an equitable interest in Hawthorne House based on marriage and renovations. The trust produced reimbursement records, the occupancy agreement, and the misconduct clause. His claim was dismissed. He sought half the trust investments. The judge reminded his attorney that beneficial trust assets were not marital property. Grant then alleged I had hidden income. A forensic accounting showed the opposite: he had hidden debt, diverted joint funds, and concealed unauthorized loans. The marital estate was not as large as he had represented to Madison. After debts attributable to his misconduct were allocated to him, his legal share was modest. Most of it went toward restitution and attorney fees. I kept Hawthorne House, my retirement accounts, my separate investments, and the quiet knowledge that he had almost destroyed me while believing he was entitled to all of them. The hardest legal issue involved the disability policy. Grant had submitted preliminary forms suggesting I might qualify for long-term cognitive impairment benefits. Had those forms progressed, he intended to become payee under temporary authority. The insurer canceled the claim, referred it for fraud prosecution, and strengthened its internal controls after reviewing the case. I was invited to consult on the changes. At first, I refused. I wanted distance from everything. Then I read the draft policy and saw how easily a spouse's unverified report could shape decisions. I agreed on one condition: the program would include direct confidential contact with the insured person and independent review when the reporting spouse gained financially. The company accepted. What Grant used as a weapon became a safeguard for someone else. 2 months after the arrest. I returned to work part-time. My first day, the receptionist hugged me without asking. My desk remained exactly as I left it. On the wall hung a framed note from my team: "We trust the investigator." I appreciated the kindness, but removed the note after a week. I did not want my survival turned into office mythology. I wanted ordinary competence back. I wanted meetings about other people's claims, coffee that I prepared myself, and evenings when my name did not appear in legal documents. Recovery often arrived disguised as boredom. That was a gift. Hawthorne House took longer to become ordinary. For the first month, I could not enter the kitchen without seeing Grant's hand around the bottle. I could not walk past the guest room without picturing Madison unpacking her suitcases. I slept at my mother's recovery suite, even after she returned to her own apartment. The trust hired a restoration crew, but I did not ask them to erase every trace of what happened. We cleaned, repaired, and returned objects to their places. We replaced the mattress, not because Madison had slept there, but because I deserved one without memories attached. We repainted the primary bedroom in the pale blue my grandmother favored. We restored the wedding photograph's frame, then placed the picture in a private archive instead of returning it to the mantle. I did not destroy 12 years simply because the ending was criminal. The woman I had been deserved a record of what she believed. The security company upgraded the system. The technician asked whether I wanted more visible cameras. I said no. I did not want the house to look like a prison. We kept the concealed system, added independent power, and created strict access logs. The cameras were no longer Grant's secret enemy or my source of nightly dread. They were simply tools, silent and factual. My mother moved through the rooms with a cane, inspecting every repaired surface. In the kitchen, she opened the medicine cabinet, found it empty, and said, "Good." I had moved all medication into a locked drawer in my bedroom and established pharmacy delivery directly to me. "Are you going to sell?" she asked. Grant's plan had made the question feel like surrender, but I considered it honestly. A house is not a moral obligation. I did not need to remain simply to prove he failed. I walked through the garden, touched the stone bench where my grandmother once read on summer evenings, and listened to wind move through the old trees. "No," I said, "not because he wanted it, because I still do." My mother nodded. "Then make it yours again." The criminal trial began 11 months after the intervention. By then, Grant had spent most of the year in custody because additional evidence showed he attempted to influence witnesses through intermediaries. He sent Beatrice coded messages asking her to delete financial records. He instructed a former colleague to describe Madison as unstable and obsessed. He offered another inmate money to contact Caroline. Each attempt strengthened the prosecution's claim that control, not panic, defined his behavior. His defense changed repeatedly. First, the recordings were fabricated. Then they were taken out of context. Then the medication alteration was an accidental effort to help me sleep. Finally, he claimed Madison acted independently and manipulated him because she wanted the house. The prosecution presented evidence in chronological order. That mattered. A single recording might be explained away. A pattern could not. Jurors heard his first calls to my doctor, watched edited and unedited versions of the compliance dinner, reviewed access logs from the medication cabinet, saw the transition spreadsheet, listened to the audio diary, and compared guardianship drafts with trust valuation records. They watched Madison enter Hawthorne House with suitcases and heard Grant say, "Once Evelyn is out of the way, this will all be ours." They heard him tell Dane the incapacity order would be handled. They heard him plan to characterize the medication issue as Madison's unauthorized act. My testimony came in the second week. The prosecutor asked me to describe the first episode. I told the jury about waking on the kitchen floor. Grant's hand on my cheek, and the gratitude I felt. I described apologizing to him after the public incident. I explained why I did not immediately suspect deliberate harm. The defense attorney tried to portray my delay as proof the allegations were constructed later. "You are a professional fraud investigator," he said. "Are you asking this jury to believe you failed to recognize fraud occurring in your own home?" "Yes," I answered. "Why?" "Because expertise does not make a person immune to trust. Grant did not approach me as a claimant or a suspect. He approached me as my husband. But once you suspected him, you designed an elaborate operation. I preserved evidence and followed law enforcement advice. You allowed him to continue believing he could control you. He already believed that." I stopped correcting him. "You staged the intervention. Grant staged it. I made sure the truth attended." A few jurors looked down to hide reactions. The attorney displayed photographs of Madison's belongings and asked whether jealousy motivated me. "Did it anger you to see another woman wearing your clothes?" "Yes." "Did it anger you that she slept in your bed?" "Yes." "Did it make you want revenge?" "It made me want her out of my house. The medical evidence made me want the law involved." "You enjoyed exposing your husband in front of his family." "No. You showed multiple humiliating videos." "I showed the videos he created by his choices. You could have confronted him privately. He had already arranged witnesses, legal documents, and an evaluator. Privacy was the weapon he used to prepare the public claim. Evidence had to be visible to the same people he intended to mislead." The attorney changed direction. "You testified the house was always yours. The trust owns it for my benefit. And you resented your husband acting as though it was his. I resented him trying to gain it by making me ill. Is it possible that all of this is ultimately about property for Grant?" "Yes." The courtroom became very quiet. Grant stared at me from the defense table. He had lost weight. His hair was shorter. Without the tailored suits and carefully selected lighting, he looked ordinary. That was not satisfaction. It was clarity. Power had always been the performance around him, the title, the house, the attentive wife, the admiring employee, the concerned mother. Remove the performance, and he was a man who made choices. Madison testified under a cooperation agreement. She admitted the affair, the move, the clothing, the parties, the documents, and her knowledge that Grant planned to trigger an episode. Her attorney had negotiated reduced charges in exchange for truthful testimony and restitution. The prosecutor asked when she first suspected Grant's plan was criminal. "When he told me Evelyn would have another episode in front of witnesses," she said. "Why did you stay?" "I wanted what he promised. I was afraid he would blame me. And I believed Evelyn was already too sick to understand." "Did you believe that because you observed her?" "No. Because Grant told me." "Did he ever show you an unedited medical record?" "No." "Did he say the house belonged to him every day?" On cross-examination, the defense called her a liar who changed sides to avoid prison. Madison agreed she was seeking leniency. "I lied before," she said. "That is why I brought the files. The records are more reliable than my excuses." Her testimony was damaging not because she seemed innocent, but because she did not pretend to be. Caroline testified next. She described the slow construction of concern and acknowledged signing a statement without speaking to me. Beatrice invoked her right not to answer several questions because her own case remained pending. The jury watched the video of her discussing trust money and selling the house. Her silence did not erase her recorded voice. Philip Dane testified under subpoena and emphasized that Grant deceived him. The prosecutor asked why he never contacted my treating physician, why he accepted documents taken from a locked office, and why he drafted broad financial authority before an independent evaluation. Dane had no satisfactory answer. Professional arrogance had made him useful to Grant, even without full knowledge. "Doctor, Ortiz explained the medication analysis without naming unnecessary technical details. She testified that the tablets in my container were inconsistent with the prescription, capable of producing the symptoms recorded, and unlikely to result from ordinary error. The pharmacist confirmed dispensing procedures. The forensic technician established chain of custody. The security specialist authenticated the camera files and showed there were no edits to the originals. Detective Reed connected the timeline to financial motive. Finally, the prosecutor played Grant's audio diary in full. Hearing his voice describe my episodes as achievements was worse in court than at home. The jury saw me listening. I kept my face still. Not because I felt nothing, but because I refused to perform pain for a system that already had evidence. Grant chose not to testify. His attorney argued the prosecution had created a villain from an imperfect husband. He said Grant faced debt, marital strain, and a manipulative affair partner. He suggested the audio diary recorded observations rather than causation. He claimed the trust conflict transformed family concern into criminal accusation. The prosecutor's closing answer was simple. Concern does not require forged emails. Care does not require altered medication. Love does not require a spreadsheet calculating the value of a wife's removal. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They found Grant guilty on charges including aggravated medication tampering, attempted financial exploitation, identity fraud, conspiracy, falsification of medical documents, and obstruction. He was acquitted of one narrow charge tied to a transfer. The prosecution could not prove he personally initiated. The acquittal mattered because it showed the jury evaluated evidence rather than emotion. On the remaining counts, the verdict was clear. At sentencing, several people spoke. Ellison described client losses and reputational damage. Caroline described the harm of being turned against her sister. Dr. Park discussed misuse of incapacity procedures. I submitted a written statement, but chose to read part of it aloud. Grant did not only interfere with my medication, I said. He interfered with the way other people saw me. He turned ordinary fatigue into decline, boundaries into paranoia, and resistance into evidence. He tried to make every response prove the story he had written. The greatest harm was not one episode on a kitchen floor. It was the possibility that my own name, memory, and judgment could be transferred to someone who benefited from calling me incapable. Grant looked down. I am not asking the court to punish him because he had an affair or because another woman wore my clothes. I am asking the court to recognize a planned campaign that used intimacy as access. He knew my routines, my medicine, my family relationships, and my trust. He used what marriage taught him to construct my disappearance. The judge sentenced him to 11 years in state custody, followed by supervised release, financial restrictions, and permanent disqualification from licensed wealth management work. Restitution orders covered diverted joint funds, medical costs, trust expenses, and part of the investigative damage. The sentence was serious but not theatrical. No amount of years could return the exact marriage I believed I had. The law could not make me unlearn the sound of his recorded voice. It could only establish that what happened was real and that real actions carried consequences. Madison received 18 months in custody, much of it suspended, followed by intensive probation, community service, and restitution. The judge cited her cooperation, but also her deliberate participation in removing my belongings, misusing property, processing fraudulent transactions, and helping create a public narrative of incapacity. She was barred from fiduciary work for several years. Before sentencing, she sent a letter through counsel. Unlike Beatrice's letter, hers did not ask me to excuse her. It listed specific things she had done and acknowledged the harm without blaming Grant for every choice. I read it once. I did not respond. Accountability did not require a relationship between us. Beatrice pleaded guilty to receiving fraudulent proceeds and making a false statement. She avoided prison because of age, limited direct involvement, and repayment, but received home confinement, probation, and a substantial financial judgment. Her house was sold to satisfy debts and restitution. She moved into a modest apartment. A mutual acquaintance later told me she still said I had destroyed the family. I no longer needed her to understand. People who build identity around entitlement often experience boundaries as violence. Caroline and I rebuilt slowly. She attended therapy. She stopped asking for quick forgiveness. Once a month, she came to Hawthorne House and helped with the garden. We spoke about ordinary things before difficult things. Trust returned, not as a dramatic reunion but as repetition calls answered. Questions asked directly. Assumptions checked. One afternoon, she found the old statement she had signed among legal copies and asked whether I wanted to burn it. No, I said. Keep it. Why? Because forgetting how easily you believed him would make it easier to happen again. She nodded and placed it in her own file. That was the day I believed our relationship might survive. A year after Grant's arrest, the last box marked Evelyn's storage still sat in the attic. I had unpacked everything else. But that box contained objects Madison and Grant had treated as disposable old birthday cards, photographs from college, notebooks from my first investigations, a chipped ceramic bird my grandmother kept on the kitchen windowsill, and letters my mother wrote while I was away at school. I delayed opening it because I feared discovering damage. One Sunday morning, I carried it downstairs and placed it on the dining table. My mother sat beside me with tea she had prepared herself. We opened each item slowly. Most were intact. Grant had not known which objects mattered. He assumed value was visible. The ceramic bird had been wrapped in one of my scarves. My grandmother's letters remained tied with blue ribbon. At the bottom lay a small leather ledger documenting repairs to Hawthorne House over 40 years. My grandmother had written every expense by hand: roof tiles, plumbing, paint, garden walls. On the final page, she had added a note to me. A house is protected by more than locks. It is protected when the person responsible for it refuses to confuse love with surrender. I had read the note years before and forgotten it. Grant had almost turned that forgetting into a permanent loss. I framed the page and placed it in my office. Not above the fireplace where guests would admire it, but beside my desk where I would see it while making decisions. The room had once been Grant's office. After the investigation, I could not bear to use it for months. His desk had held forged signatures and calculations of my disappearance. I considered sealing the room, then realized avoidance would give him permanent occupancy in another form. I removed the dark furniture, restored the original windows, and converted the space into the headquarters of a small nonprofit initiative called Clear Record. The program began with a meeting between me, Dr. Ortiz, Detective Reed, Naomi, and the insurer that had nearly accepted Grant's disability claim. We identified a recurring problem. People experiencing coercive control often sounded less credible because abusers had already told family, doctors, and financial institutions what to expect. If a victim objected, the objection became proof of instability. If she remained quiet, silence became consent. Clear Record trained professionals to examine incentives, contact the person directly, preserve original context, and treat sudden requests for guardianship or financial authority as high risk when the requester stood to benefit. We produced checklists for hospitals, insurers, banks, and adult protection agencies. We emphasized that concern and exploitation can use the same vocabulary. I am only trying to help may be sincere, but it cannot replace verification. The first woman referred to our program was 62 and recovering from a stroke. Her nephew claimed she wanted him to sell her home and move her into assisted living. A nurse noticed that the nephew answered every question and became angry when staff requested private conversation. Independent review showed the woman understood her finances and had never authorized the sale. The nephew had already contacted a realtor. Nothing dramatic happened. No hidden cameras exposed him. A careful nurse asked one more question, and a house remained with its owner. That outcome meant more to me than any headline about Grant. Grant had believed control was achieved through spectacular moments, a collapse at dinner, a family intervention, a signed court order. In reality, control often succeeds because ordinary systems fail to pause. Clear record taught them to pause. My employer allowed me to divide time between investigations and the program. I returned to full-time work gradually. At first, every case involving medication, or a spouse, triggered physical memories. I would feel the kitchen floor beneath my shoulder or hear Grant telling a nurse I might not remember. Therapy helped me separate current evidence from past fear. I learned that vigilance and hypervigilance are not the same. Vigilance examine fact. Hypervigilance assumes danger before facts arrive. Grant had tried to make me distrust myself. I refused to let survival make me distrust everyone else. Trust returned through boundaries rather than innocence. I no longer shared passwords for convenience. I reviewed medical portals regularly. I prepared my own medication. I updated the trust with successor trustees, independent of family from. I created emergency instructions that required two unrelated professionals to confirm any incapacity claim. Those actions did not make me cold. They made care harder to counterfeit. Hawthorne House also changed. The formal dining room where Grant arranged the intervention became a community meeting space once a month. We hosted workshops on financial documentation, medical advocacy, and estate planning. Women arrived carrying folders, phone screenshots, and stories they had been told were too small to matter. A missing statement, a partner opening mail, a medication refill they did not request, a relative urging immediate signatures. Not every concern proved abuse. Some were misunderstandings. Some were administrative errors. The point was not to assume guilt. The point was to return knowledge and consent to the person whose life was being discussed. My mother attended the first workshop wearing the sapphire brooch Madison had taken. I had considered selling it because the sight made me angry. My mother said, "Objects do not become loyal to thieves merely because thieves touch them." She pinned it to her jacket and welcomed guests at the door. By the third workshop, the brooch belonged to our family again. The civil case against Grant concluded 18 months after the criminal trial. The trust obtained a judgment for attempted interference, legal costs, security expenses, and damage to personal property. Most of the amount would never be collected, but the judgment ensured any future income or assets Grant obtained after release would face claims. He filed an appeal challenging the camera evidence. The appellate court rejected it, noting the recordings came from common areas of a residence subject to security monitoring, were authenticated, and were supported by independent evidence. He filed another motion, arguing ineffective counsel. That failed too. Each legal attempt arrived in Naomi's email. Naomi's email summoned to the 7-8 added, noting, I stopped reading the full documents. She summarized what required my decision. Grant no longer had automatic access to my attention. He sent 3 letters from prison. The first accused me of exaggerating. The second blamed Madison and Beatrice. The third called his actions a desperate response to debt and claimed he never intended permanent harm. Naomi asked whether I wanted the letters preserved unopened. I chose to read the third because part of me wondered whether accountability had reached him. It had not. He wrote, I made mistakes because I was terrified of losing everything. The sentence revealed the same belief that drove the scheme. Everything meant the house, the trust, his career, his image, and his future with Madison. My health and autonomy did not appear in the definition. He described taking control as fear of losing control. He apologized for how events affected me, not for causing them. At the end, he asked me to support early release when eligible. I placed the letter in the legal archive and instructed Naomi that no personal correspondence should reach me again. I did not answer. Silence, once used by Grant to isolate me, became a boundary I chose. Beatrice attempted contact through Caroline. She said she was ill and wanted to reconcile before it was too late. I agreed to one supervised conversation by video, not for her comfort, but because I wanted clarity about whether she understood. She appeared smaller in her apartment. Without the jewelry and carefully staged living room she once used to impress people. I should have questioned Grant, she said. You should have questioned why his solution to my supposed illness made him rich. He was my son. I was your daughter-in-law for 12 years. A mother wants to believe her child. Belief is not the same as helping him take someone else's home. She began crying. I lost everything. You lost things you purchased partly with stolen money. You have no compassion. Compassion would be listening to your regret. You are still describing only your losses. The conversation ended after 15 minutes. I did not speak to her again. That was not revenge. Reconciliation without accountability would have required me to resume the role Grant assigned the woman who absorbs harm so other people can feel like family. I had retired from that role. Madison completed her custodial sentence and entered probation. She found work outside finance and made restitution payments. Her attorney notified Naomi that Madison wanted to return one final item, my grandmother's ring. I had not known it was missing. Madison claimed Grant gave it to her before moving her into the house and said it belonged to his late aunt. She had kept it in a safe deposit box. Perhaps as security against him? Perhaps because she liked it. The ring arrived in an evidence envelope with a brief note. I am returning this because it was never mine. Even when I wanted to believe it could be. I took the ring to my mother. She recognized it immediately. My grandmother had stopped wearing it after arthritis made her fingers swell. We had assumed it was lost during the estate inventory. Grant must have taken it years earlier, long before Madison moved in. That discovery changed the timeline of his entitlement. He had been quietly converting my family history into gifts before he began openly planning the house. He felt anger, but not surprise. Large betrayals often rest on small permissions the betrayer gives himself. One ring, one password, one reimbursement, one lie to a sister, one call to a doctor. By the time the scheme looks monstrous, the person committing it has practiced crossing boundaries for years. I had missed the ring because I trusted him. Inside rooms, no guest could enter. Trust had granted access. It had never granted ownership. I had the ring cleaned and placed it beside the framed ledger page. I did not wear it. Some objects are better kept as evidence of return. Caroline asked whether I ever thought about dating. Friends tried to introduce me to kind men. For the first 2 years, the idea of allowing another person into Hawthorne House felt impossible. Then I met Daniel Roos, an architect who volunteered at a preservation workshop. He was a widower with a quiet sense of humor and no interest in managing my life. We drank coffee several times. On our 4th meeting, he asked whether I wanted him to pick me up at home. I said no. He answered, "All right. I will meet you there." No wounded pride. No interrogation. No attempt to convert a boundary into rejection. That simple response moved me more than extravagant attention would have. We continued slowly. He did not receive a key. He did not ask for one. The absence of pressure became its own kind of tenderness. I mentioned Daniel not because a new man completed my recovery. He did not. Healing was not a waiting room for another romance. I mention him because Grant had taught me to expect love to demand access. Learning that affection could respect a closed door helped me understand how distorted my marriage had become. My life was complete before Daniel arrived and remained mine while he was present. On the 2nd anniversary of the intervention, Clear Record held a small reception at Hawthorne House. There were no reporters. The guests were nurses, investigators, advocates, lawyers, and families who had used the program. Dr. Ortiz stood in the kitchen discussing direct patient verification. Reed spoke with a bank compliance officer near the fireplace. Naomi reviewed new trust templates with 2 younger attorneys. Caroline arranged flowers. My mother sat beneath her own mother's portrait wearing the sapphire brooch. I stood at the front door greeting people. For a moment, I remembered Madison entering with suitcases and Grant telling her everything would be theirs. The memory arrived without controlling my body. It was history, not prophecy. The house had not saved me by itself. Cameras are machines. Trusts are documents. Locks are metal. Each tool mattered because people acted. A doctor tested the pills. A lawyer froze authority. An investigator listened. A sister corrected her statement. A technician preserved metadata. And I believed what I saw. Evidence does not protect anyone until someone refuses to look away. During the reception, the security application sent a routine motion notification. A delivery driver had placed a package at the side door. My heart accelerated automatically. I opened the feed, saw the driver leave, and closed it. 2 years earlier, an alert at Dos Tres A.M. had divided my life into before and after. Now an alert could simply mean a package. That ordinary moment felt like victory. Later, after the guests left, I walked through the quiet rooms, switching off lights. In the living room, I paused beneath the camera above the bookcase. The indicator was dark. I knew it was recording because I had chosen that setting. I no longer needed the light to reassure me. On the mantel stood one photograph: my grandmother, my mother, Caroline, and me in the garden during a summer long before Grant. 4 women, 3 generations, one house that had survived every person who mistook patience for weakness. I touched the old brass key in a small bowl beside the photograph. It still opened nothing. Yet I kept it because my mother was right. A key is not valuable only for the lock it turns. Sometimes it reminds you that access can expire. Grant believed marriage gave him permanent entry to my home, my accounts, my medicine, my family, and finally, my identity. He forgot every form of access depends on consent, law, and truth. When those disappeared, so did his place inside my life. People later asked which moment felt like the real victory. Was it watching the police lead Grant out? Was it hearing the guilty verdict? Was it learning the house remained protected? None of those moments gave me what people imagine revenge feels like. There was no sudden restoration of everything taken. The real victory came months later when I woke before dawn, walked into my own kitchen, prepared tea, and drank it without fear. No camera alert sounded. No one watched for symptoms. No husband stood nearby rehearsing concern. I sat beside the window while morning light entered the room. And my body belonged entirely to me. That was what Grant had tried to steal. Not only property, not only money, he wanted authorship over my condition. He wanted to decide what I remembered, what others believed, where I lived, which documents I signed, and whether my resistance counted as sanity. He thought, if enough people repeated his version, the truth inside my own body would become irrelevant. That is why the most important lesson from my story is not that hidden cameras catch liars. Cameras can fail. Files can be deleted. Systems can be corrupted. The deeper lesson is that control often begins long before anyone recognizes a crime. It begins when one person insists on answering every question for another, when concern becomes surveillance, when care requires passwords, when financial help removes independence, when every boundary is treated as proof of distrust, when a spouse says, "You may not remember," often enough that everyone stops asking what you do, Remember? Grant did not transform overnight from a loving husband into a man who altered medication. He practiced entitlement in smaller ways. He told stories about my career as though my success supported his image. He presented my house as our achievement. He borrowed access and treated it as permission. I allowed some of it because correction seemed exhausting and harmony seemed generous. That does not make me responsible for his crimes. Responsibility belongs to the person who chose them. But I learned that peace purchased by surrendering small truths becomes expensive. Every time I let Grant take credit for something he did not build, he became more certain he deserved it. Every time I accepted concern, instead of asking for records, he learned how easily care could hide control. Every time family praised him for managing me, the role became more believable. If you recognize any part of that pattern, do not wait for a dramatic revelation. You do not need hidden cameras to take your unease seriously. Ask direct questions. Request copies. Speak privately with your doctor, lawyer, bank, or trusted friend. Keep records somewhere. Another person cannot erase. Learn which assets are yours, which permissions exist, and how they can be revoked. Most importantly, notice who benefits from calling you confused, trop difficult, unstable, selfish, or incapable. Those words may describe real conditions in some situations, but when they always appear the moment you resist someone else's control, they deserve examination. I also learned something about silence. Grant interpreted my silence as ignorance because he understood only two forms of response: obedience and confrontation. He expected me either to accept his story or explode inside it. He never imagined I could step outside the frame, gather evidence, and return with people who understood what they were seeing. Silence is not always strength. Sometimes silence protects abusers. Sometimes speaking immediately is necessary for safety. In my case, silence became strategy because I was supported, medically protected, and working with professionals. I was never truly alone after that first call to Naomi. That distinction matters. A person facing danger should not imitate a dramatic revenge story at the cost of personal safety. The power in my response did not come from surprising Grant. It came from creating a network he could not privately manipulate. My doctor spoke to me directly. My lawyer secured the trust. Investigators preserved evidence. My employer verified my work. My mother believed me. Caroline eventually corrected her mistake. Truth became stronger because it existed in more than one place. Grant's plan required isolation. My defense required connection. Hawthorne House remains in my family, but I no longer describe keeping it as defeating Grant. The house is not a trophy from a war between spouses. It is a responsibility passed between women who understood that security requires both care and boundaries. The garden still needs pruning. The roof still requires maintenance. The old pipes still make noise in winter. Real ownership is less glamorous than the fantasy Grant sold Madison. It is invoices, repairs, decisions, and the willingness to protect something without letting it imprison you. I stayed because the house still reflected my choices. Not because leaving would have meant he won. That freedom to stay or leave without his desire determining the answer was the true return of ownership. Grant once believed he had replaced me inside my own home. He saw Madison in my clothes, my photographs in boxes, and witnesses prepared to declare me incapable. He thought the process was nearly complete. He did not understand that replacing a person requires more than occupying her rooms. My history remained in the trust records. My competence remained in my work. My health remained in objective tests. My voice remained in every call he failed to control. And the house itself preserved the conversations he believed would disappear into private walls. The cameras did not destroy Grant's plan. His plan was destroyed the moment he mistook my absence for helplessness. The cameras simply made sure no one could rewrite what happened after I came home. If you have ever been told that setting a boundary makes you cruel, remember this: people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will often call your protection an attack. If someone demands access to prove love, control to prove care, or silence to preserve family, ask what they are afraid the truth will reveal. I spent years believing marriage meant keeping another person safe from embarrassment. Grant relied on that belief until the night I stopped protecting him from consequences. I did not ruin his life. I stopped helping him hide what he had done with it. Madison did not lose my house because I was more powerful than she was. The house had never been hers. And wanting another woman's life did not create ownership. Beatrice did not lose her social standing because I refused compassion. She lost it because she valued her son's entitlement more than another person's safety. Caroline did not rebuild our relationship through one apology. She rebuilt it by choosing truth repeatedly after learning how easily love can be manipulated. And I did not recover because a judge announced that I was competent. I recovered because I stopped allowing other people's descriptions to outrank my lived reality. Tonight, Hawthorne House is quiet. My mother is healthy enough to complain about the garden. Caroline will visit next weekend. Clear Record has helped dozens of families pause before signing away control. The cameras remain active, but I do not watch them obsessively. My medicine is secure. My accounts are mine. My name appears only on documents I have read. The primary bedroom contains no trace of Madison's perfume. The boxes are empty. The old brass key rests beneath my grandmother's photograph. Somewhere in a prison cell, Grant may still believe a different decision from me would have saved him. He is wrong. The only person who could have saved Grant from the consequences was Grant before he chose the first lie. The first unauthorized access. The first altered pill. The first plan to turn care into captivity. By the time he brought Madison into my house, I did not owe him rescue. I owed myself evidence, safety, and a door he could never enter again. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to remember that absence is not surrender. Trust is not ownership. And quiet people are not empty rooms waiting to be occupied. Sometimes the person saying nothing is not defeated. Sometimes she is saving the recording. Medication safety should never depend entirely on the person insisting that you are confused. When unexpected symptoms appear alongside changes in pills, packaging, drinks, or control over your doses, suspicion is a reason to pause and verify, not proof of who caused it. Preserve the original container and related records. Contact an independent medical professional or pharmacist, and seek emergency assistance when there may be immediate danger. Do not taste, test, replace, or publicly identify a suspected substance on your own. A careful process protects both your health and the truth. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.